Thousands of martial artists stood in line at the Demon Hall to participate in the 10 Demon Hall tournament. One man is amazed by the outcome of participates this year, and another bearded man says no fool would miss out on the chance to participate. It is said that as long as their talent is good, they'll pass down demonic martial arts regardless of faction. Then suddenly the bearded man sees something strange, and questions if someone has died. The other man laughs and says that the tournament hasn't even begun yet. No one could have died. The bearded man then asks why is there a young mortician among the contestants. A mortician is someone who prepares the dead for burial. The young boy looks up and declares to his grandfather that the time has now begun. Buyunseol is the protagonist of this story. He was given that name after his precious grandfather took him in from the snowy field where he'd been abandoned. His grandfather was a mortician, so he too learned the trade. The work was harsh, exhausting and despised by others, but despite all of that, the protagonist endured the challenge. By observing dead bodies, the protagonist was able to tell what kind of martial artist that person was in their life. The grandfather was pleased and believed that the protagonist was a heaven-sent mortician. The protagonist felt happy and truly believed as long as he had his grandfather with him, he can face any hardships. At least until that day came. It was a cold and windy night. The grandfather looked outside, then looked down and took a deep breath. He muttered, "Those who are good do not come, and those who come are not good." The grandfather wakes up the protagonist. The grandfather tells the protagonist he wants to play the corpse game since it's been a while. The grandfather promises the protagonist that if he endure the game, he'll gift the protagonist a ceremonial robe and sword he longed for. The protagonist is happy and says he'll play. The grandfather gives off a warm smile and tells the protagonist to try to hold out until sun rises. The protagonist is confused and wonders why till sun rises. The grandfather suddenly shuts the coffin and then grabs his sword. The grandfather walks out of the house and closes the front door. Someone approaches and tells the grandfather he hid like a little rat. The man calls the grandfather the seven-bladed demon, Bu Janyang. The grandfather says he hasn't heard that name in a long time. The man gives off an evil look and states that the grandfather refused the vice-lord seat of the demon hall. The man attacks the grandfather. The grandfather stops his attack and tells him he became a mortician not out of survival but to atone for his past. The grandfather tells the man he can take his life, but they should move the fight elsewhere to avoid the innocent from being hurt. The man laughs, then agrees and tells the grandfather not to think of running away. The grandfather smirks. The coffin the protagonist is hiding inside starts to shake. The protagonist pushes the door open, declaring that he does want the ceremonial robe and sword, but it's just too cold to bear. The protagonist is caught off guard because his grandfather is nowhere to be found and he usually waits when the game is done. He looks around wondering where the grandfather could have gone at this time of hour. The protagonist opens the front door and notices something odd. The outside is all destroyed and look like a fight has taken place. The protagonist looks ahead and then starts running towards the inner woods. He slowly stops running and sees something horrific. His grandfather injured and bloodied from a distance. The protagonist yells out to his grandfather. He gets closer and noticed that the grandfather is missing his arms and eyes. The protagonist walks up to his grandfather and asks what happened. The grandfather, unable to see or move, and asks if it's really Seol. The protagonist says it's indeed really him. The grandfather apologizes to the protagonist and tells him it's his time to leave. The grandfather coughs up blood and tells the protagonist if he dies, then the protagonist shouldn't take up a mortician's work. The protagonist begs his grandfather to stop talking like that, but the grandfather tells the protagonist to listen well. He tells the protagonist to never seek out revenge. The protagonist cries and grins his teeth. He yells that he won't, but he can never forgive them for doing this to him. The protagonist holds on to his dying grandfather and tells him he'd rather die and go to the afterlife too than to live in a world without him. The grandfather listens and always thought he'll be able to leave calmly. The grandfather smiles and has one last request for the protagonist. He tells him to go far away and know the time they shared made him happier than he could ever say. The grandfather takes his last breath and falls to the ground lifeless. The protagonist is in shock. He looks down at his dead grandfather and cries some more. A few moments later, the protagonist looks emotionless. He stands over his diseased grandfather. The protagonist calmly touches his face and tells him that he knows he asked him not to seek out revenge just to keep him safe. But he cannot do that. The protagonist examined his grandfather's body. Both arms were severed at once. A sword struck from below in an upward direction. And then each of his grandfather's eyes were pierced next. The protagonist concludes this style is the grotesque sword technique, a demonic type of sword art. Only one among the others are capable of making such wounds, and that is the heavenly yoga art, which allows one to freely control flesh and muscle. And there's 93 slash marks on the grandfather back. This isn't the work of an accomplice, but more like an incense device that can fire hundreds of hidden weapons at once. Also the discoloration under the tongue and inside his nails. Those are signs of poisoning. The person who murdered his grandfather was someone who mastered the foreign art heavenly yoga, possessed the incense memory device called the Absolute Realm, and handle extreme poison toxins. A demonic path figure. There will not be many such figures. The protagonist will definitely revenge his grandfather. The protagonist fills out his information to participate in the tournament. The man sees that the protagonist is from the Blazing Sun sect but wonders why he is taking forever to sign the paper. He thinks the protagonist is scared and tells him to hurry up or leave. However, he suddenly stops talking. The protagonist bites his thumb. Both men watch. And then the protagonist signs the paper with blood. When his grandfather died, he too had died. And nothing remained but the path to vengeance. This tournament will be the first step towards his revenge. Orthodox and unorthodox. The battle between the two great forces ruling the martial world has continued for many years. The orthodox faction led by the Martial Alliance pursues justice, and the unorthodox faction led by the demon heaven worships only power. The two forces had long maintained a balance. But the orthodox wanted to widen the gap. That marked the birth of 18 great righteous masters representing the orthodox faction. The demon heaven felt threatened by the Martial Alliance, so they devised a plan to strengthen its own power, and without delay executed the 10 demon successors' plan. Regardless of factions, 10 prodigies would be chosen to inherit the martial arts of the 10 demon sections. That groundbreaking proposal drew countless young people of the martial world toward the demon heaven. Many young martial artists are sizing up each other. The protagonist is looking among the competition. There could be someone who is related to the Hong Su who killed his grandfather. The protagonist believes Hong Su is surely an immeasurable master. To avenge his grandfather, he must too become such a master. Becoming a demon successor is the only path to grow stronger quickly. All the young martial artists are shocked by what they see. Chief Instructor Golden Arm Blood Eyes Hyacryan Young has arrived. The challengers all feel uneasy with his presence. The chief instructor explains that the tournament is a place to select the greatest prodigies of the demon path. Only those who pass all the gates prepared by the main hall will formally become demon successor candidates. For the first gate, the masters of the demon heaven will examine everyone's bones and muscles. Some challengers are upset and would rather just partake in a martial arts contest. One of the masters suddenly examines their body and passes them. The protagonist wonders if he passes, would he move on to the next location. One master approaches the protagonist. He grabs the protagonist's arms. The master is utterly shocked by what he is feeling. The protagonist's bones and muscles are completely ruined. The master wonders why would he even entered the contest. But the killing intent the protagonist gives off is real. However, he doesn't want to pass the protagonist. The protagonist isn't surprised and expected this result because all he ever learned was washing corpses. There's no way he would pass such a gate. But he doesn't want this to end like this. The chief instructor announces the first gate has ended. One of the martial artists is upset by the results. If demon successors are chosen by bones and muscles, then why did they arrange a contest? And calls the test unfair. The chief instructor is wondering about fairness. He tells the contestants that the most important thing in learning martial arts is bones and muscles. How dare someone who couldn't even pass the most basic bone test speak of unfairness? The martial artist said all he wants is a chance. The chief instructor angrily looks at him and says don't worry because in the second gate, prodigies who can master martial arts despite weak bones will be chosen. The chief instructor walks away and tells them the second gate shall begin. He gives an ominous look and tells all the contestants that they will fight each other and survive until only one remains. The contestants are at a disbelief because they have to kill each other even though they are all part of the demon path. One martial artist understands the assignment. He looks to his left and sees the protagonist. He grabs his weapon and then launches it at the protagonist. The protagonist is caught off guard. The weapon stabs into another contestant. He collapses and dies. The protagonist looks at the boy's lifeless body. The guy who tried to kill the protagonist acknowledges him because he was able to use his impressive reflexes and agility to evade the fatal blow. He picks up his weapon and challenges anyone who wants to be next on his hit list. The chief instructor is not impressed and believes the contestants are full of worthless trash. Another master agrees because the boy showed that he's a dangerous threat and when someone does this, it'll place a target on their back. Some contestants are unsure what they should do. Then suddenly other contestants starts to attack one and another. More contestants are dying by the second. Other contestants are crying and in shock by what they are witnessing. Then the chief instructor is shocked by what he's witnessing. Him and the master smile, knowing that there are a few contestants who aren't fools. While the other contestants fight, they stay clear in a corner and watch things unfold. Many more contestants start to die and collapse on the battleground. The protagonist looks emotionless by the scene he sees. He thinks they all are fools because they've lost their reason out of fear of death. The chief instructor said only one would survive until the end, meaning the key isn't killing but surviving. The protagonist believes he can survive as long as he stays calm and keep his composure. One martial artist kills another and then notices the protagonist from a distance. He wonders if the protagonist was hiding since he doesn't look like a martial artist. The protagonist observes another corpse and notices thin cuts made from a swift dagger technique. The other martial artist yells at the protagonist that he will kill him. Then he attacks him. The protagonist dodges the attack, however the box he was carrying was destroyed. The boy makes fun of the protagonist and wonders if he's some kind of funeral good merchant. The protagonist thinks about the past. His grandfather had left him a note with clothes and a knife on top of the box, telling the protagonist happy birthday. Back into reality, the protagonist is furious at the boy for destroying the gift from his grandfather. The boy begins to attack the protagonist, but then another person attacks the boy from behind, giving him a direct slice to his back, killing the boy instantly. The guy tells the protagonist that he doesn't need to thank him for stepping in and that it actually worked in his favor, allowing the protagonist be bait. The protagonist ignores him. The guy tells the protagonist that he has sharp eyes but looks like he never learned martial arts. The guy smiles while he defends off an enemy attacking from his blind spot and tells the protagonist he can kill someone like him anytime he wanted. The protagonist glances at the guy. The chief instructor notices the guy is carrying a legacy sword called Nakin from a master called Mukhian. One of the masters tells the chief the guy found the secret manual and sword deep in the mountains. Although the guy is self-taught and has full of openings, he can be considered the only disciple from Mukhian. His foundation is lacking, however, he might even win this tournament and become a strong candidate for the demon sect. The chief and master doesn't think anyone else is stronger than the guy wielding the legacy sword. The protagonist still is observing corpses. The guy is cleaning off his legacy sword. He tells the protagonist he is the last one standing. The both of them are standing between countless dead bodies. The guy is excited because if he kills the protagonist, he'll be considered a candidate for the 10 demonic sections. The protagonist looks unfazed. He looks at the guy and questions if he's really the strongest there because the protagonist has already figured out the guy's weakness. The protagonist holds his knife and walks towards the guy. The guy smirks and is ready to see what the protagonist got. He continuously attacks, but the protagonist keeps dodging. The chief instructor is watching closely nearby. They notice the protagonist isn't being overwhelmed by the attacks and actually turns his body ever so slightly to avoid fatal blows. One of the masters realizes that the protagonist memorized the attack patterns by examining the corpse the guy killed. The protagonist has incredible powers of observation. The protagonist tells the guy he has a pathetic sword. The guy only managed to cut off scraps of his flesh. The protagonist is provoking the guy. The guy smiles and tells the protagonist that he is arrogant. The guy loses his cool and attacks the protagonist head-on. The protagonist prepares himself for the attack. He understands that he'll only have one chance. Something the protagonist learned while examining the corpses the guy killed was that his killing strikes always target vital points, specifically the heart and the head. The protagonist understands the guy always go for the upper body, and so he dodges the attack. The guy looks down at the protagonist. The protagonist sees a clear opening at the guy's neck. Remembering his grandfather telling him that is a spot even veteran masters have difficulty to train. Even if a child strikes with all their might, they'll be able to knock an adult unconscious. The protagonist lunges forward and attacks, instantly stabbing the guy in the throat. Blood splatters everywhere, and he falls to his death. The protagonist still in shock, wondering if everything is over now. The master and instructor chief is both surprised by the results. The chief yells out Buyunseal of the Blazing Sun sect, passes the second test. The protagonist hears his name. His grandfather is asking him where is he at? The protagonist is happy to see his grandpa. He runs to him. The grandpa says he can't see him. The protagonist's eyes widened. The grandpa turns around with missing eyes and tells him he can't see him. The protagonist is scared, then jumps up out of his sleep. Other young fighters look at the protagonist. Waves are flowing in the middle of the ocean. The protagonist is inside of a ship and seems to have fainted because he had lost a lot of blood. He was seriously hurt, but now he doesn't feel much pain. The protagonist wonders if the demonic cult brought in a renowned physician. The protagonist looks up and realizes he noticed familiar faces. They're the ones who passed the first test. They look down upon the protagonist for being weaker than them. One of the ship crew members tells all the challengers that they need to disembark. They've arrived at the next trial, the Hell Path. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. The more support you show, the faster I can post the next chapters. So stay tuned. You won't want to miss what's coming next.